Getting into chapter 4 here, we're going to be doing a lot with converting. Okay, so each section we're going to talk about different ways to convert and like the different things that we can convert. For section 1, we're going to be going just talking about our system of measurement. So stuff that we use here in the United States. So things that you would be most familiar with would be feet, miles, yards, ounces, pounds, um, cups, quarts, gallons, those kind of things. So the first thing I have in your guys' packet are all of these charts that help you compare two different quantities, and some of these you probably already know. So the first one is like length or distance. So 1 foot is the same thing as 12 inches, 1 yard is the same thing as 36 inches, or 1 yard is the same thing as 3 feet. And then 1 mile is 5,280 feet. Okay, so those would be some common conversions if you were trying to go in between feet to miles, feet to inches, feet to yards, anything like that. And then for weight or for mass, we have 1 pound is equal to 16 ounces. 1 ton is equal to 2,000 pounds. So again, pounds and ounces, tons, those are kind of the most common things that we use here in the States. Then there's capacity or volume, so like liquid capacity. So we've got like tablespoons, teaspoons, ounces, cups, pints, quarts, gallons. Those are what you're going to be using or seeing the most. The first thing that we're going to practice is just writing out two equivalent measures as a ratio. So being able to say, if I'm trying to go from like feet to yards, what are the two ways that I can actually write that up? So I'm going to show you how to do one of them here, and then you guys are going to try the second one. So write two unit ratios that relate the pair of measures. For the first one, they want us to do ounces in pounds. So ounces, if we go back up to the top and we look for ounces in pounds, it says that 1 pound is the same thing as 16 ounces. So one way we could write that is we could put 1 pound over the 16 ounces. Or you could say 16 ounces is the same as 1 pound. The different setup, just to know that you guys can interchange it like that, is important because when you do things like converting a lot of measurements, or if you have to do more than one conversion. So what might be common is you do, like you've got something going feet per second, and you want to figure out how like many feet, like feet per second to miles per hour. So you have to convert feet to miles and seconds to hours. You can set up a chart or a bunch of charts to do that, and you can easily flip-flop these conversions in your charts so that you're getting it set up the right way so that your units will eventually cancel out. You guys would have probably done this back in Algebra 1. It's called dimensional analysis. You also do it in science when you're trying to do a lot of conversions. And we do like a big chart. They called it like the railroad method or the picket fence method is what some students have told me. So they set up this really big, it's like a big fraction essentially, and you start with what they give you, and then you just take one of your units and you try to convert it to another one. So I want you guys to try to set up the two conversions that you could do for cups and pints. So write down what you think that would be. Okay, so how could you guys compare cups and pints? What does it say up in your chart up there? Like how many cups are in a pint? 2 cups in a pint? So you could have done like 1 pint over 2 cups, or what would be the other one? Good, 2 cups over 1 pint. And again, it just depends on how you're trying to convert it, how you have it set up originally, to figure out which one of these you would use in your conversion process. All right, if we are trying to change from one U.S. customary unit to another one using unit ratios, this is when you do a little bit of your dimensional analysis, but it may not be like huge problems. You might just have to do one simple operation in order to get this to change. So some of the steps that you guys can follow as you're doing this, especially if you're not maybe sure where to start, you can write the original measure in the numerator of a fraction and then put a 1 in the denominator. Then you can multiply this fraction by your unit ratio, so like what we just wrote, and then reduce it. So make sure that if you can, if it's not simplified after you've done like your operations, you want to make sure that you simplify it. So for example, if I want to figure out how many inches are in 5 feet, using some of my information from those charts on the other page, you guys should hopefully know that 1 foot has 12 inches in it. Okay, so if I have 5 feet, an easy thing that I can do like 5 feet over 1. I can take that times 12 inches over 1 foot, because there's 12 inches in a foot. So I'm setting it up this way. This is like that dimensional analysis I was talking about. The feet cancel off because you've got 1 in the numerator, 1 in the denominator. And that's why you would maybe want to set it up that way, so you can see how those labels cancel off or they're gone. So really what you're doing here is you're taking 5 times 12, which is going to be 60, and that would be inches. So there's 60 inches in 5 feet. So for number 2, how many pints are in 4.5 quarts? So again, I'm going to set this up the same way I did before. I have 4.5 quarts. I'm going to put that over 1. Give me something that I could set up over here that relates pints and quarts. Over 1 quart. There's 2 pints in a quart. Again, my quarts cancel. So I'm really taking 4.5 times 2, which would be what? 9. So there's 9 pints. So here's that word I was talking about, dimensional or dimension analysis, is the systematic examination of the appropriate measuring units of a solution. It's a fancy way of saying you can do a really big conversion in one singular chart if you need to. So like I said in that example, if they gave you something that was going feet per second and they wanted it in miles per hour, you would not only have to convert feet to miles, but you'd also have to convert your time. So you can do multiple conversions in the same problem too. To get you guys started, most of the time you're only going to see one. You may not see some that have like a whole bunch. For this next one here, it wants us to figure out how many inches are in 2 1/3 yards. Let's first take 2 1/3. Let's change that so it's improper. So remember, you take 2 times 3, you add 1, put that all over 3, so we get 7/3. This is what we're dealing with for yards. Now the reason why I would suggest that you do that is because I've been setting up fractions when I was multiplying earlier. So for this one, I'm putting 7/3. I'm just going to put yards on top. And I want to get to inches. Let's go yards to feet first. So how many feet are in a yard? 3. So I'm going to put 3 feet on top, 1 yard on the bottom. Now let's go feet to inches. How would I set this one up? Good, 1 foot on the bottom, 12 inches on top. That way, yards cancel, feet cancel, and I'm left with inches. So when you're doing this, if you've got a lot of labels happening here, they should all be canceling off. You should always have 1 in the top, 1 in the bottom. That way they undo each other. So then we have on top here 7 times 3 times 12. And on the bottom you have 3 times 1 times 1, which is just 20. So 7 times 3 times 12 is 252. And then we would divide that by 3. That's going to come out to be 84. And that would be inches. Any questions so far? Don't be afraid to go back and look at those charts. Okay, especially if you've forgotten, like even with the liquid stuff, like ounces and pints and quarts, If you're not really familiar with that because you don't use it a whole lot, you may not know some of those. So don't be afraid to go back and look at those in your chart, especially when you're doing like your homework as practice. Don't just guess. Use the charts to actually figure out how much is in whatever you're trying to convert to. All right, so the next piece here is converting one unit of measure to another. Again, using conversion factors. And this would be if you're going, it doesn't matter the way that you go. So like if you want to go feet to inches or inches to feet, you can go both ways. And so there's going to be another chart we're going to look at here in just a minute. But what you can do, some steps here for these ones is, again, write it as a unit ratio. Write it as those fractions like we saw before. Change the fraction or the ratio to its decimal equivalent so that you can be dividing or multiply by that decimal so that you don't have to have all these fractions if you don't want to. So let me show you an example. We're going to develop two different conversion factors here that relate pounds and ounces. So the first one I'm going to do is if I went from pounds to ounces. First, if I were to set it up using fractions, I would put like my number of pounds over 1 and take that times the number of ounces that I know are in a pound. That way my pounds cancel and I'm left with ounces. Another way to do this, which might actually be a little bit simpler, is to just take the number of pounds you have and take that times 16 because there's 16 ounces in 1 pound. So that would be just a faster way of converting instead of setting up all those fractions like we were doing earlier. Now if I want to go the other way, so if I want to go ounces to pounds, it looks the same, it's just everything's kind of been flipped. So we take, so like the first one, we would do ounces over 1 times pounds over ounces. And for the second one, instead of taking it times 16, I would take the number of ounces times 1/16. And that would get me pounds. One 16, like if we actually found that decimal, so if I took 1 divided by 16, it's the same thing as taking the number of ounces times 0.0625. So that would be getting me from ounces to pounds. So because we can do that, this basically takes all of those problems that we've been working with, gets rid of the fractions, and it's just a multiplication problem now. But you just have to know, like, what do you multiply by? So depending on which way you go, it changes the number. And so it's always going to be like 1 over 16 or 1 over 12 or 1 over 3. So some of those fractions you might know, but some of them you may not know. So that's why on the next page, there's this other chart here for you guys that has it all laid out for you. These are going to be the most common ones that you're going to see. Again, that has some of those same measurements that we talked about on the very first page. We've got feet, inches, yards, miles, pounds, ounces, tons, cups, pints, quarts, gallons. If you notice, it says on every single thing here, like how you're converting it. So it says if you're changing from feet to inches, you multiply by 12. If you're going the other way, if you're going inches to feet, you multiply by this decimal. It says 0.083 repeating. That's 1 divided by 12. If I typed in 1 divided by 12 in my calculator, I get 0.083 repeated. Okay, so the first one is kind of like multiplying by the whole number. The second one is multiplying by the fraction with 1 over that whole number. And it does this for all of them. So if we were going from pints to cups, right here, I would multiply by 2. If I was going cups to pints instead, I multiply by half, because that would be 1 over 2, so 0.5. So using your guys' chart, what am I going to take 56 times? Because I've got 56 ounces and I want to get it to pounds. So what am I going to multiply to go from ounces to pounds? Look at your chart and tell me. Point what? 0.0625 or 1 over 16 Either one's going to get you the same answer here. Can you guys do that and tell me how many pounds this would be then? Good, 3.5. So if I had like 6 gallons and I wanted to go to quarts, I would take 6 times 4 to get to quarts. I would just go back up to my chart and I would say, okay, I have gallons, trying to get to quarts. That means I multiply by 4, like right here. Okay, so this chart's really handy because it just tells you exactly what you need to multiply by. You don't have to worry about setting up a bunch of fractions. Now we have something called standard notation. Standard notation is when, instead of writing something like 38 inches, they want you to write it in like how many feet could be in there and then how many inches are left over. Or instead of everything being in ounces, they might want you to figure out how many whole pounds do you have and then how many ounces are left over. That's called standard notation. And that makes more sense to us instead of being told that something is, 75 inches. We would want to know that it's however many feet and then this many inches left over, especially if you're working with construction or anything like that. You're going to want to be able to see those kind of measurements because they make more sense in our brain because that's just how we think. So we're going to do a little bit of practice with this. They're going to give us something that's not in standard notation and we need to make it so that it is. So this first one has 8 pounds, 20 ounces. The 8 pounds is fine, but the 20 ounces needs to get changed because we do have a full pound in it. How many ounces are in 1 pound? 16. So what I do here is I look at just the 20 ounces. 20 ounces is the same thing as 1 pound, because that's 16 ounces. So then I think, what's 20 minus 16? 4. So there's 4 ounces left. So this is actually the same thing as 1 pound, 4 ounces. So what I do with that then is I take my 8 pounds and I add the 1 pound to it, and then I just attach that 4 ounces on the end, because I can't combine ounces and pounds. So this is really going to be 9 pounds, 4 ounces. You only have to change the one that's not in standard notation. Okay, so why don't you guys try number 2? You've got 1 gallon and 5 quarts. I want you guys to change that so it's in standard notation. So the main problem here is the 5 quarts. How can I rewrite 5 quarts? Not 2 gallons. 1 gallon with a quart. There's 4 quarts in 1 gallon. So this is 1 gallon and 1 quart. So then I take the 1 gallon that I already had, and I add another gallon and the 1 quart to it. And that's my final answer. There, 2 gallons, 1 quart. For number 3, it says 2 yards, 4 feet, 16 inches. We actually need to change 2 of them on this problem. We need to change the feet, and we need to change the inches. So let's do the feet first. 4 feet would have how many full yards in it? 1, because there's 3 feet in a yard. So I've got 1 full yard, and then 1 foot left over. 4 minus that 3 would be 1. How could I rewrite 16 inches? Good, 1 foot and 4 inches. Okay, so now you're going to take those two new measurements that you guys wrote down, and we're going to add it to the 2 yards from the problem. So we have 2 yards. We're going to add 1 yard, 1 foot, 1 foot, and 4 inches. I just put plus signs in front of everything just to kind of keep track of what I'm adding. So 2 yards and 1 yard would be 3 yards. That takes care of those. 1 foot would be 2 feet. That takes care of those. And then we have 4 inches left. So you could have some that look like that where you actually have 3 measurements and you have to convert all of them. So you have to change 2 of them so that they're in standard notation. Any questions on how to do that? All right, now we're going to get into adding and subtracting some of these measures. We're going to focus first on adding, because adding is easier than subtracting. So in order to add customary measures that are not alike, so if they're unlike each other, what you want to do is convert each measure to a measure that has a common customary unit. So if you've got feet and inches, convert them both to either feet or convert them both to inches. You want them to be the same first, and then add the numbers together, and then if you need to, you can always go back. You can always go back to feet and inches or something like that. So for this one, I'm trying to add 3 feet and 2 inches. It's going to be easier for you if you make them both inches. Because if you try to make 2 inches into feet, you're going to end up with a fraction. Which isn't bad, but I just know a lot of people don't like fractions. So it might be easier if we just get them into inches. How would I take 3 feet and change that to inches? Okay, so what is 3 times 4? 36. So now I have 36 inches plus 2 inches, which would be 38 inches. And I'm going to leave it there because if I took it backwards, I would just end up with my 3 feet 2 inches again, because it would be just taking it back to that standard notation. Now if we have mixed measures, so this would be if each item has 2 different units involved. So if I had feet and inches and I was trying to add something else that was feet and inches, and like the one that we're going to do together is pounds and ounces, what you want to do is basically think about how you guys learned how to add in elementary school. Line them up in columns, okay? Keep like things together, so you're going to keep like pounds together, ounces together, yards together, feet together, inches together, okay? And then you're going to add them up, and then if you need to do any of that standard notation of rewriting it, then you can do that at the very end. So for this one, I have 6 pounds, 7 ounces. And I have 3 pounds, 13 ounces. So see how I'm stacking them like that on top of each other there? Then I'm going to just add those numbers. So I'm just going to take 6 plus 3, which would be what? And 7 plus 13. Okay, now which one do I need to rewrite a little bit? Okay, 20 ounces. So let's focus on that for a second. What would that be the same as? Good. 1 pound, 4 ounces. Because there's 16 ounces again in a pound. So then I'm going to take my 9 pounds. I'm going to add 1 pound to it, and then just attach that 4 ounces on the end. So that would be 10 pounds, 4 ounces. So again, that's just getting it back into what we would call standard notation. Okay, let's get a little bit into subtraction. Subtraction isn't always as nice. Subtraction is always harder than addition. It's just how it always has been. It's the same way with these units. Now, some of the rules are the same though, like they were with adding. It's just you've got a subtraction sign now instead of an addition sign. So if you need to, like if you only have 2 things that you're trying to combine, again, get them to be in the same unit first. So get them both be in inches or they both be in pounds or whatever, and then subtract. So this one, be careful with how it's worded. It says subtract 15 inches from 2 feet. So you're actually taking 2 feet minus the 15 inches. How can I get my 2 feet to be inches? Times it by 12. So how many inches is it? 24. So I'm going to take 24 inches and subtract 15 inches. What would that be? 9. Now if they're mixed, like we saw on that previous example with the addition, same idea happens. You need to align them up, so put like measures kind of stacked, and then subtract, and then do any converting at the very end if you need to. So I'm taking 5 feet 3 inches from 7 feet 4 inches. So again, you have to be careful with the wording there. You're taking the 7 feet 4 inches, and you're going to subtract 5 feet 3 inches. What's my answer going to be for this one? Now that worked out because the one on top was like bigger numbers on both sides. In the past, when you guys have subtracted and the number on top is smaller than the number you're trying to subtract away, you've had to do some borrowing. So that kind of thing can also happen when we're trying to subtract measurements, where you might have to do some borrowing or you might have to think about converting something because the number's too small. And when you're subtracting measurements like this, we're not going to get negative numbers. Okay, if you're trying to find like the area of a floor, you're not going to get a negative amount. It should always be positive. So when I'm doing one of these, again, I'll start by aligning them up, regroup if you need to. So change, like if you need to grab a pound and add the ounces to make the ounces become a bigger number, that's what you need to do when they talk about regrouping. So like this one, I start with 7 pounds, 8 ounces, and I'm trying to subtract 3 pounds, 12 ounces. Now, the 7 and the 3 are not the problem here. It's the 8 and the 12. I don't want to take 8 minus 12 because I'm going to get negative 4, and I can't have negative 4 ounces. So what I need to do is almost, in a sense, rewrite this bottom one. So I'm going to leave 7 pounds, 8 ounces alone. But I'm going to, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I'm going to rewrite the 7 pounds, 8 ounces. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pound away from 7, so I'm down to 6 pounds. How many ounces are in a pound? So what I'm going to do is take 16 ounces, that pound that I borrowed, and I'm going to add it to the 8 ounces on the top, because now that's going to fix my problem here. So now I'm going to have 6 pounds. 16 plus 8 is going to be 24 ounces, and I'm subtracting now the 3 pounds, 12 ounces. So what's going to be my answer for this one? Doing this subtraction. So 3 pounds, 12 ounces.